Joining me now is Republican Congressman Michael McCaul of Texas. He is the chairman emeritus of both the House Foreign Affairs and House Homeland Security Committees. Thank you so much for joining me, Chairman. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you just heard all of those explanations from the administration about why it launched the war with Iran. Do you have a clear sense of the answer to that question, the why now?
Yeah, a lot of people ask that question. I say there's been an imminent threat since 1979 when the Ayatollah came into power. And ever since that time, for over 5 decades, we'd have terror events attacking Americans. They are the biggest roadblock to peace in the Middle East. But to answer your question, I don't know of any immediate attack. They were rebuilding their nuclear weapon systems, their ballistic missiles, and their ICBM capability that could hit the United States of America. I think they also saw an opportunity, at least Israel did, to see the Ayatollah convene with his cabinet, or so to speak, at the compound, and it made for a very good opportunity to decapitate Iranian leadership. And I think that dictated the timing of this, in my judgment.
Well, and you and others have argued that there's been this threat for 47 years, and I think no one would argue with that. But the question, I guess, is how can a threat that's existed for 47 years also be imminent?
Well, here's the deal. Midnight Hammer, they obliterated. They set them back a year or two. They were rebuilding this, however. They were creating intercontinental ballistic missiles. They were not stopping. Trump tries to negotiate, and when negotiations fail, as these did, and they're not negotiating in good faith like Maduro did, there will be consequences. I actually applaud a president who, for the first time in 50 years, since really President Carter, has the guts and the courage to take on a regime that has been such the largest state sponsor of terror, largest killer of Americans, but most importantly, they are the roadblock to the Abraham Accord finalization, normalization between the Arab Gulf states like Saudi and joining with Israel. And once that happens, it's going to be transformational in the Middle East because that threat now has been taken out to a large extent.
I want to ask you how you see this overall conflict, because quite frankly, President Trump has called it a war. We've heard others in the administration refer to it as a war today. House Speaker Mike Johnson said we're not at war right now. So I'm curious for your take. Is this a war, Congressman?
Well, it does trigger notification under the War Powers Act when you have a conflict in hostile territory, which that's what this is. So they have given notification to the members of Congress. We did have a briefing on this. The clock now is ticking under the War Powers Act. Within 60 days, if this operation is not concluded, then it does require an authorization from Congress. From what I can see, the president has given a 5-week deadline, but in war, you never know what can happen. But I think it is their goal to conclude this operation before the 60 days expire.
So just to be very clear, you're saying the president should come to Congress before the conclusion of the 5 weeks?
If the conflict is not resolved in 60 days, it will require a cessation of those activities unless authorized by Congress. And when it comes to war powers, I think it's always better for the administration to work with Congress to get the side of the American people supportive of this. And we've seen that throughout our history. It's always better when Congress is working with the executive, on these issues. But I don't know in this partisan environment. I tried to upgrade the 2001 AUMF after 9/11 to include modern day threats, and we tried to add the proxies of Iran, the Shia proxies, that being Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthi rebels, and yet that was met with opposition by both the left and the right, to be honest with you. And so I think that was visionary to try to update the AUMF to update it to the modern threats of both Iran now and the Shia proxies. That would be the AUMF I could envision if we could get bipartisan support.
Congressman, let me ask you about some of NBC's new polling on Iran. According to our poll, 54% disapprove, 41% approve. So underwater. What do you make of that? If the president's going to war, should the American people not overarchingly support it?
Well, they should. You would normally be in a honeymoon phase right now, if you will. And
but meaning, should the president launch a war if he doesn't have more support? Should he be launching a war if he doesn't have more support for it?
Well, I think he needs to explain it. And I think he needs to put his best messengers out there, explain what is really happening. And I think also, what are the objectives here? I think the American people will support the end of the Ayatollah, freeing the Iranian people from oppression for 50 years. What they don't support is an unending, bogged down war in the Middle East. And I think the administration needs to explain that better. That's not the objective. Our military objective will be completed in 5 weeks. And then I think the bigger question here is what happens after that? We don't want to get bogged down, and we don't want to have to nation build after this. We don't want to put troops on the ground because they will be targets and magnets for the jihadists. So what is phase 2 of the operation, or the next phase after the military operation is completed? That's going to be the far more difficult one, but that's ultimately up to the Iranian people to decide, and we can help them. But you need 3 things I always talk about: is leadership, you need weapons, and you need communications. So that has to be part of the next steps. And right now, it's not crystal clear.